G'day, Starlo here, and welcome to the third episode of my Tuesday Chats, proudly brought to you by CM Partners Accountants. In the previous episode, we got up to the end of the 1980s and into the early 90s, my return from living in Canada, and that fateful call from one of Rex Hunt's TV producers asking if I'd be willing to take Rex fishing for his TV show. Now, I'd met Rex briefly a couple of times over the years, and I was very well aware of his stellar VFL and AFL football history. He played over 200 first grade games for Richmond, Geelong and St Kilda, including 2 premiership appearances. But it was as a fisherman that I knew him best, and I know how passionate he is about his fishing. He'd had radio shows about it. He'd even had a brief stint on TV in Victoria in the early 80s with a show called Real Action. But it was in 1991 that he got his Rex Hunt show up on Channel 7 in Melbourne. Now, I believe that it was on quite late at night on a weeknight, and it only showed in Victoria in those days. But come 92, he got the gig to go national. So, of course, he needed contacts right around the country to produce the material for a national TV show, and that's where I came in New South Wales. I'd done a tiny little bit of work in front of a camera back in the old Go Fish Australia days. Do you remember that? The John Mellion hosted show on the ABC. I'll talk about that in a future episode as well. And I'd done a little bit of work in front of the TV cameras over in Canada for the Canadian sport fishing show. I'd done a few videos and things as well, including Going for Gold that a lot of you will remember, that benchmark production about catching big yellowfin tuna strip baiting back in the day. It's what a lot of people still remember me for. Anyway, I was more than happy to help Rex out, and he came to my part of the world on the south coast of New South Wales, and we went fishing. I was as nervous as heck about doing stuff to the camera, but also working with Rex, who was just a larger-than-life personality. But he instantly put me at ease, mostly through a series of very blue jokes that I can't tell in a format like this. And actually, it's worth mentioning that Rex is a very funny guy. He's got excellent comic timing. I often used to say, I reckon he could have had a career as a stand-up comedian if he hadn't gone down the fishing and football line. He is genuinely a very funny bloke. I don't think I've heard too many people that tell a joke better than Rex. He'll spin it out over a really long period of time, but it's full of punchlines all through until you get to the main punchline at the end. And interestingly, a lot of those throwaway lines that he's famous for in his TV shows are punchlines from his jokes. Things like, "Thank your mother for the rabbits," "Are there any questions?" "Waving her wooden leg," and others that I won't go into. And every time he used one of those lines, we'd crack up because we'd know the joke. We'd probably heard it half a dozen times. Always a slightly different version though. Getting back to the story, I took Rex fishing, and I must have done a few things right because I got invited back to do it again, and eventually I ended up with my own little segment on the show. Mostly I was reviewing tackle or catching bait or whatever. I joked that for my first year on the Rex Hunt show, I was limited to invertebrates. I couldn't catch an actual fish for the camera. I had to catch things like prawns and worms and squid and talk about tackle, but I really enjoyed doing it, and I learnt a whole lot by doing it. The other great thing about working on the show was all the wonderful people that had hooked me up with, most notably Kay Bush, better known to most of you simply as Bushy. Now, I'm on record on many, many occasions as saying that Bushy is the best multi-species, multi-method angler that I've ever had the good fortune to fish with, and I absolutely stand by that. He is a freak when it comes to fishing. There's nothing he can't do, and he's an incurable tackle tinkerer as well. His dad was an engineer, and I think he inherited a lot of that. He's very good at building things and modifying things and repairing things, and he's always thinking about a better way to do things, how to invent a better mousetrap. And boy, oh boy, did I learn a lot from fishing with Bushy. Mind you, make no mistake, Rex is no slouch as an angler either. He's very good. He had a strong background in fishing for snapper and King George whiting and trout and redfin and all sorts of other species. He came up through the bait fishing ranks and became a very good lure and fly fisher. Never underestimate Rexy. He's a really good angler. So anyway, I ended up doing 8 or 9 years with the Rex Hunt Show, and what a ride it was. We did lots and lots of travel, and I spent an incredible amount of time away from home. In fact, in one of our busier years, I worked out that I was away from home for 175 nights out of the 365. That's a lot of travel. It wasn't without its downsides either. I missed a lot of my kids growing up, and ultimately all that time apart ended up costing me my first marriage, something I'll always be sad about. But there's no denying that my involvement with the Rex Hunt Show really lifted my personal profile and helped build my career. There's nothing quite like getting your ugly mug on TV to raise the recognition factor. The show also took me all around Australia and across the globe in search of content. We went to New Zealand, the Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, Thailand, but I guess the two trips that really stand out in my memory are the ones to England and Japan. I would never have been able to afford to go to either place as a struggling fishing writer. In England, we fished for all manner of species, including things like pike and perch, that's redfin in the freshwater, and Atlantic cod and European sea bass offshore. That day jigging for cod with Bushy on Stu Arnold's charter boat out in the English Channel was one that I'll never forget. Stu had literally thousands of wrecks marked on his plotter, and they ranged from Spanish galleons that had sunk in the 16th century to German Messerschmitts that were shot down during the Battle of Britain. It was like a history lesson and a fishing trip combined. When we pulled up on one of those wrecks, Stu had a look at the sounder screen, stuck his head out the cabin door and shouted to Bushy and I, "Lads, you're going to fill your boots here." And we did. Every drop with our jigs was a cod. I have slightly less rosy memories of our sea bass trip. We went out with a really switched on local crew. In fact, they were commercial rod and reel fishers. They were catching sea bass for the restaurant market using rods and reels, so they knew their stuff. We used live sand eels as bait, and they'd sussed out a really good method for using them. But of course, I figured I was smarter than them and modified my rig just a little bit because I thought I could improve it. Big mistake. I was the only one on board who didn't catch a European sea bass, and I've still never caught one. It remains on my bucket list. Even Mike Dickinson, our producer, who couldn't catch his bum with both hands, managed to catch a sea bass by using the rigs that the crew gave us to use, not changing them. That was a pretty important lesson for me. Listen to the local experts. It's one I've never forgotten. But we had so much fun in England. Oh, and while we were in England, we also got to visit the River Itchen, a famous chalk stream in the south of the country, and fly fish for brown trout and grayling in those hallowed waters. That was pretty special too. You know, the Rex Hunt Show was on in something like, I think it was 162 countries all around the world, and it was huge in England, Ireland and Wales. I reckon we got recognised more often over there than we did back here in Australia. I still remember going up to a fruit stall selling these incredibly delicious strawberries on the street in London and buying a pound off the bloke behind the counter, and he took one look at me and he said, "You're Rex's mate, aren't you?" I said, "Yeah, I am." So he gave me an extra pound of strawberries to give to Rex, and that sort of thing happened all the time when we were in England. Another funny aside though, everyone remembered Bushy's name. I guess it's the big moustache and everything, but I was just Steve in those days, and people easily forget that. And we were in Billingsgate Fish Market at about 4 a.m. one morning to film a segment. We're walking along, and one of the big burly fishmongers in his bib and brace overalls behind one of the stalls calls out and said, "Hey, look, it's Bushy and his mate Dave." Oh dear. People still lean out of car windows and wave to me and go, "Hey, Bushy." I guess it's only fair that they remember him better than me. He's a better fisherman. Anyway, back to the story. Japan. Now, what a trip that was. What a country. I absolutely loved Japan. I'd love to get back one day. I don't think I ever will. But boy, we had a lot of fun over there. And we got to see some amazing stuff. We went to the Shimano factories. We went to fish breeding facilities. We rode on the bullet train. And we did a bit of fishing. I got to go herra fishing in a stocked pond. Now, herra are in the carp goldfish family. I think they might actually be a crucian carp. And I got to fish with a local expert. We were using relatively short tenkara-style poles with the line attached directly to the end and floats and like a pudding bait. And it was a really tricky fishery, but eventually I sort of partially sussed it out and I did manage to catch a couple thanks to the help from this local expert, who, by the way, didn't speak a word of English, so we did a lot of sign language. Luckily, we did have an interpreter as well. Funny story about that. For the camera, I'd talk to the expert, then the interpreter would interpret the question. He'd give his answer in Japanese, the interpreter would tell me, but all that got cut out in the editing, so it was me asking him a question and turning around and saying to the camera what his answer was, and people said, "Wow, we didn't know you spoke such fluent Japanese." The wonders of TV. The other remarkable kind of fishing that we got to see was AU fishing. Now, AU are a relatively small member of the trout salmon family that are native to Japanese rivers, and they're largely vegetarian. They eat a mossy weed that grows on the rocks in the river, but they're also highly territorial and quite aggressive. So what you do at the beginning of your day's fishing is go and buy an AU from one of the AU dealers. I don't know how they catch them in the first place. They must net them or something. And then you put that in your little live bucket and you take it out and you get on the river and you truss it up with a bridle rig through the nose and a little trailing bit of line to a small ultra sharp treble hook that goes in back near the tail of the AU. And then you use a massively long pole. Some of them were 10 to 12 metres long, these graphite poles that were worth thousands of dollars even back in those days. And you'd present your AU into the river and swim it into all the likely little nooks and crannies behind the boulders. And if there was another AU there, he'd come in and attack yours and hopefully get hooked on the treble, and you'd swing them both out of the water and catch them in your landing net. Rexy and I didn't even try to do it. These local experts, they were Shimano Pro Team members. They made it look so easy. It was like a ballet. It was a beautiful thing to watch. Oh, and interestingly, the AU are also called sweet fish in Japanese, and they're really, really tasty. So they're quite keenly sought after. We were based in Osaka and we travelled around quite a bit. We got to go up into the hills and see traditional cormorant fishing, which is done at night with a big basket of fire hanging over the bow of the boat. And the cormorant handlers have got, 6, 8, 10 cormorants all on separate cords. They're holding them and there's this tangle of cords coming out of their hand, and the cormorants are swimming, diving down, grabbing various small to middling fish, which they can't swallow because they've got a rubber ring around their neck. And the cormorant handler has to stop all these cords getting tangled, and then when he sees one of his cormorants with a fish, he brings it in, shakes it out into a basket and puts the cormorant back in. They were amazing to watch. Really, really skilled operators. That was a lot of fun. In fact, the whole Japanese trip was a lot of fun and a real eye-opener. But as great as all those trips were, that travel has its downsides, and it's not just all the time you spend away from home. It's living out of suitcases, it's queuing up at airports, it's dragging heavy bags and all your gear and all the camera gear from a bus to a motel at some crazy hour of the morning, and then repeating the whole process in reverse a couple of hours later after not enough sleep. We flew on all kinds of planes, from big ones to scary little ones, and we had some pretty terrifying flights along the way. I remember us getting caught inside a storm. I think it was in the Solomon Islands, a massive thunderstorm in a fairly small plane, a Norman Britain Islander, little twin engine job, and it was the scariest flight of my life. I reckon we came very, very close to dying. Water was actually coming into the plane. It was running about a centimetre or two deep along the floor of the plane. We were completely lost inside the clouds, going up and down thousands of feet at a time. Absolutely terrifying. It's not a good look when you look at the pilot and he's white with fear as well, and you can see how tightly he's gripping the controls. When we finally landed, no one had said a word for quite a while. It was interesting. We all got out of the plane, dropped to our knees and kissed the ground. I'm not kidding. It was a spontaneous response. It put me off flying in light planes, I must say, for the rest of my life. I'm still not a great flyer because of that experience. We also fished in all manner of conditions on all sorts of oceans, as you can probably imagine. We had to go out there and get the job done pretty much regardless of what the weather was doing. And I must give a little call out to one of our favourite cameramen, Harry Panagiotides. Harry Alphabet, we used to call him, because I think he had just about every letter of the alphabet in his Greek surname. But what a great cameraman Harry was, and I believe still is. But Harry never overcame his extreme susceptibility to seasickness. I used to joke that I don't think anyone else on earth had thrown up in more oceans than Harry. But what a trooper. He'd be filming away, and looking through that eyepiece is a great way to get seasick. And you'd see him changing colour and going green, and eventually just move the camera to the side, quietly without any fuss, throw up over the side of the boat, and then continue getting the shot. What a hero. Harry was also the subject of another famous story from our travels. Again, I think we were in the Solomon Islands, and we used to wash our clothes at night and hang them outside to dry so that we could put them on again next day. You need to wear the same clothes when you're presenting to camera for continuity, but the camera guys and that didn't have much in the way of clothing with them either because we had so much camera gear to carry. Harry washed his underpants and he hung them outside over a bush just outside this little hut we were staying in not far from the water in the Solomon Islands, and little known to us, a whole bunch of fire ants crawled into his underpants overnight. He put them on, and it took them about 10 or 15 minutes, obviously, to wake up and start biting him. But when they did, Harry did some pretty fancy dancing and some very quick undressing. There were so many funny stories on the road, but you know what they say, what happens on the road stays on the road. So a lot of those stories will remain untold for all sorts of reasons, but it was a memorable time. I look back with great fondness on my time with the Rex Hunt Show, and I'm immensely grateful for the opportunities that it gave me and the people that I got to meet, as well as Bushy and Rex himself, people like Harry and our producer Mike Dickinson and Jackie and Noel and a whole bunch of other people, too many to mention, but they were all fantastic to work with and they all taught me so much. Those were amazing years. The other thing to remember about Rex Hunt is that he did more to promote fishing in the mainstream media than anyone before or since him. And he also did a wonderful job of promoting catch and release through his kissing them and letting them go routine. It's hard to overestimate just how much impact that's had on subsequent generations, and it's helped to make Australia a leader in terms of sustainable recreational fishing. Never forget that. That was Rex's work. But like they say, all good things come to an end, and towards the end of the 90s, the show started to wind down. Bushy and I were left wondering what our next gig might be. Little did we guess it'd involve a squeezy little soft plastic lure called a squidgy. But that's a story for next time. Until then, thanks for watching, and thanks to CM Partners Accountants, definitely the best accountancy firm I've ever worked with. Seriously, if you're looking to change accountants or get your first one, use the Starlo link in the description down below and give them a call for a free consultation. You won't regret it. Until next Tuesday, this is Starlo wishing you tight lines and, dare I say it, yibbida yibbida. Thank your mother for the rabbits. Here's to Rex, and I'll catch you all hopefully next Tuesday.